to another Ask a Reporter.
Hello.
Hello, I'm Amelia and...
I'm Ruby.
And this is Ask a Reporter. Yay! This is our first Ask a Reporter together, actually.
It is, actually.
I think.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's exciting.
Yeah.
So, Ruby can tell us what we're talking about today.
Today we are talking about Mungo Man. And if you watched the story this week, you would know that Mungo Man is the oldest skeleton that was ever discovered in Australia. And that's what our story was about, and that's what this Ask a Reporter is about.
Yeah, and we've got heaps of great questions from you guys.
Yep.
So, let's get into it. It's a really cool topic, actually. Did you ever want to be an archaeologist when you were little? I feel like lots of kids always want to be archaeologists, especially with like Tomb Raider and Indiana Jones.
It starts in the sand pit.
That's it. Yeah.
Finding marbles
All
in the sand pit.
All right, cool. Well, first question, let's jump into this, guys. Thank you so much for sending through so many of your awesome questions again this week. So, well, let's go for what location, Ruby, like where was Mungo Man found? That's from Esther from Mark Oliphant College.
Hey Esther, that's a good question. So Mungo Man was found in a place that we now call the Mungo National Park, which is, I think, in New South Wales. Mm-hmm. Or it was close to the New South Wales, South Australia border. And he was found in a place called Lake Mungo, and it's called Lake Mungo, but it's not a lake anymore. It's a big dry desert covered in sand, but it's called a lake because back in the day when he was alive, it would have been a lake there. I think about 15,000 years ago that lake dried up.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
That's super interesting. I think a few of you asked that question, actually. So... do you know, Ruby, how did Mungo Man actually die?
That's a great question, and it's actually one that we can't answer because it's just something that we haven't been able to figure out from studying him. What we do know is that when he died, he was quite old for someone who would have lived back then. By today's standards, not that old. He was about 50 to 55 when he died. But, you know, back then people usually didn't live that long, so he was quite old. There was another skeleton discovered right near Mungo Man called Lady Mungo. So that was a female skeleton that was discovered. You can see here, not very far away, like almost within sight of each other.
Yeah, I reckon that was somebody's question, actually. Yeah, I'll find it if you keep going.
Oh, there you go. So they were discovered pretty close together. They were discovered a few years apart, and the Mungo lady is quite a bit younger than Mungo Man as well. But we know how she died because we could tell from her skeleton that she was cremated, which means that her body was burned after she died. So again, we don't really know how she died, but her body was burned afterwards. Whereas Mungo Man was buried. And he was buried in a very particular position on his back with his knees bent, and he had been sprinkled with red ochre. And so what scientists have taken away from that is that he was actually probably a really important guy. He was probably a leader in the community and, you know, respected, so that when he died, he was, you know, given a very respectful burial. Yeah,
wow, that's really interesting. So I did actually find the person that asked that was Preston, who asked how far was Mungo Lady away from Mungo Man.
There you go, Preston. Very close is the answer.
Cool. So I think you pretty much just answered this then as well. This is from Daniel and Harry. Was Mungo Man a leader? So they think so then, right?
Yeah, they do think so. How
do they ever tell? Like, are there more... you know, is there anything they can compare to, I wonder, like to find out?
Well, that's the thing, because he is the oldest and we haven't found any skeletons as old as he is, we're not sure, you know, maybe a lot of people were buried this way, but maybe he's the only person that was buried this way. So you can only make, you know, an educated guess about that. But they do reckon that he was probably an important person. They do know that he was probably a hunter as well. And they could tell that. This is so clever, I reckon, how they could tell this. Because they studied his bones in his arm and they found out that he had arthritis in his elbow. And they reckon that he got that arthritis from throwing a spear because he would have had to be going like this all day, all the time.
Yeah, that's so interesting. That was in your story. That's amazing, isn't it? Because so how did they tell that he even has arthritis just by so it's like studying the
so I think
that's
arthritis
amazing.
is when your bones rub together and they rub away cartilage and things like that. So I guess from looking at the
worn
bones,
away.
they would have been able to tell that it had worn away from rubbing off on each other, and so he had arthritis. So he probably, even though he was an important dude, he still had to do some of the hunting.
Yeah, there you go. All right, so what do we have next? Are scientists still studying Mungo Man? That's from Latoya.
Latoya, this is a great question, and it's one that is actually really important to this story. So, as you would have seen if you watched the story, Mungo Man's skeleton was taken away for testing by scientists when he was found, and the traditional Aboriginal owners of the place where he was from, which was the Willandra Lakes area, they were really upset that his skeleton was taken away because they believe, that your spirit stays where you have been buried, and that if you take someone's, skeleton away from their spirit, that's a really bad thing to do. So they wanted Mungo Man to be returned to the Willandra Lakes, and last year that finally happened. So his body was given back to the traditional owners, and right now it's in a box somewhere.
It's a secret location,
It's a
isn't
secret
it?
location, so no one knows
which
where
is
he is
cool.
now. And he's being kept there while the traditional owners decide whether to bury him back where he was found and just leave his body there for good, or whether they should keep his body out of the ground so that he can be studied by scientists in the future. So the thinking is that maybe in the future there will be, we'll have technology will advance to a point where we'll be able to study more about Mungo Man from his bones and looking at his remains that we can't even do yet. So there's kind of this disagreement whether he should be, just left in the ground where he was found and just allowed to rest for forever now, or whether we should keep him and keep doing scientific, investigations into his
as technology
skeleton.
gets better. Yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah.
So can you tell Caitlin from Mark Oliphant College as well,
Caitlin.
was Mungo Man the first human to walk on, in Australia, or were there others? So what do you reckon?
The answer to that is he probably wasn't the first, but his discovery was really important because it showed that before we discovered Mungo Man, the thinking was that maybe Aboriginal Australians had been, living in Australia for about 20,000 years or so. But when we found Mungo Man, he was 42,000 years old. And so that's more than double the amount of time that we initially thought that Aboriginal people had been here. So we know a minimum. We know that Aboriginal people have been in Australia for at least 42,000 years, but they could definitely have been here for longer than that. We just haven't found any skeletons that are older than that. So, but yeah, absolutely. It's very, very likely that people were here even before that.
Yeah, isn't that amazing?
Yeah, it's a long time.
It's a long time. So, can you tell me, I don't know if you sort of answered this before, because you did tell us how old Mungo Man would have been when he died. Do you know, this is from Alexis, it's a question they've just sent in from Evermore Vale Public School, what the average lifespan of people, Indigenous Australians 60,000 years ago would have been?
That's a good question, and there's probably some estimates around. I'm not sure exactly, but it would have been less than that. That's what the scientists reckon that Mungo Man was. For back then, 50, 55 was super old.
Wow, really?
Yeah, so he was like a grandpa. But yeah, it's hard to say, what the average lifespan would have been. Probably a lot less because, back then, life was a lot harder for people. They couldn't go to the grocery store. They had to hunt and gather and, live out in the elements. And it was, life was tough and, people didn't live that long.
Yeah, there you go. I reckon I have heard a stat actually a while ago in one of my old stories. I reckon it was around 35, but I don't know exactly. But I remember, yeah, you're exactly right. That's 35 to 55. That's a massive jump. So
yeah, whereas
nowadays
he was
living well, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, I wonder what he was doing.
If he was an important guy, he was probably living the high life.
That's it. That's what it would have been. Yeah, you should have got other people to go and hunt for him then.
Yeah.
Less dangerous, live longer.
Maybe he hunted so much that he was promoted to being an important
person. All right, so can you tell us, how did he find Mungo Man? So the person who found him.
Oh, yes.
That's from Arana Catholic Primary School.
Cool. So, Mungo Man was found by a geologist named Jim Bowler. And geologists don't study human remains typically, they study the formation of landscapes. And so Jim Bowler was, in the Mungo National Park area studying the Australian landscape and how things had, how the layers of earth had changed over time and things like that. And he was on a motorbike riding around and he spotted what turned out to be Mungo Man's skull sticking up out of the sand. It had been after a lot of rain, and so a lot of sediment had been washed away, and he literally just spotted it there.
Wow, that's amazing.
I know, and he said that he went over. So Mungo Lady had been discovered a few years earlier, and by the same person, Jim Bowler. And he was so excited by this discovery of Mungo Lady that he went back to the Willandra Lakes and decided to look for more skeletons. And he was only there for a few days and not very far away from where Mungo Lady was discovered when he found Mungo Man there. And he said he was just so excited.
Wow, that's amazing. A question from little Amelia, not me at all. Do you know how he found Mungo Lady?
Mungo Lady,
I'm just curious. I don't know, but yeah.
I know that it was a very similar story. So I don't think they spotted her skull necessarily, but they weren't looking for her. So they were just studying the rock and the formations and things like that, the landscape, when they stumbled across some bones. And they said that they were looking at these bones for a while, and then they sort of kind of started putting all the pieces together and they were like, this is not an animal, this is a human skeleton.
Yeah, pretty cool find. You'd be pretty happy if you found something so historic and amazing. So if it was a lake, how come Mungo Man was buried there? That's from Cooper from Evermore Vale Public School.
Yeah, good question. You can't really bury someone in the water, can you?
Yeah, that's it. Very good question.
So he would have been buried, I guess, near a lake or beside a lake. The region would have been very wet, but not all of it would have been, covered in water. So when we say Mungo Lake, it's kind of the area in which there was a lake, but not necessarily.
Because it's sort of the name of, the area as well as just the actual body of water.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Well, let's see what we've got here. Sorry, guys. Oh, you guys are probably used to me being slow. I'm so sorry. I'm getting used to this.
You're still getting used to it.
Nathan was so fast and he'd always have it lined up. Meanwhile, I'm like,
he had so much practice.
That's true. Thanks, Ruby. She's being nice. Let me see. So you've sort of explained what is so important about Mungo Man then?
Yeah.
What's so important going forward? Like, what do you think? Why is he worth, us talking about this now and worth remembering?
Yeah. Well, I think it's, his original significance. So the reason that he, has been so important hasn't changed. Because since he was first found, which was back in 1974, since then we haven't found any skeletons that are older than him. So being the oldest skeleton ever found in the whole of Australia makes him really special just from that. But, he was also very important as a symbol for Aboriginal Australians. Because, to them, getting Mungo Man back and having Mungo Man, back in the Willandra Lakes region and back on his land was important for them, because they wanted Australian scientists to understand the significance of, taking Aboriginal remains away from their burial places and testing them for science. They wanted, scientists to understand why that was problematic and why that was, very offensive to Aboriginal people. And it took decades and decades of them explaining and scientists trying to, explain why they needed the skeleton to study for science. And so it was this tug of war between, having respect for Indigenous culture in Australia and also needing to, push science forward. And I think that's why Mungo Man especially has been very, very special, because he's been the tool that this story has been told of how science and Indigenous Australia has come to an understanding.
And I should say as well, that was Ryan's question, because I didn't mention that, from
there you go,
Olympus
Ryan.
State School. So that was a really good question.
Great question.
Well answered. So, why is the location of Mungo Man so secret? Do you know?
Yeah,
That's
so...
from... Ooh, something's happening. Ah, things are moving. That's from Jay.
Yeah, that's
That's from Jay from Berry Public School.
Yeah, good question. So Mungo Man's location is being kept secret now, basically because he's very valuable to
Lots of people.
Everyone. And so, and the fact that it's still being decided what will happen with him just means that, while we're deciding, we're just going to put him away where no one can touch him and no one can move him and no one can do anything, because we're still deciding. And so it'll, as we said before, he'll either go into the ground and be buried, or he'll be left available for scientists to study in the future. And so when that decision is made, we'll know where he is after that, because we'll either bury him or put him in a special scientific centre. But until then, it's just hush-hush, and that's what the traditional owners have decided to do.
Yeah, and it's their right to decide. So, Chelsea wants to know, were there any missing bones, or was it a complete skeleton?
Yeah, good question.
And that's Chelsea's from Evermore Vale Public School. Thanks, Chelsea.
Well, Chelsea, we have a picture here, so we can show you exactly what they found.
Oh, I like pictures.
So this is them digging away at the skeleton, and you can see that it's not a complete skeleton, but it's really, considering how old it is, it's in a really good condition. And you can see that the archaeologists that are digging him out are being so careful. They're using paintbrushes just to brush the dirt away from the bones in a way that is very, very gentle, so they can preserve the skeleton as well as possible before they lift it out of the ground. So it wasn't a full skeleton, and it took them a long time to even be able to figure out things like the gender, whether it was a man or a woman. But yeah, so it wasn't a full skeleton, but it was a pretty amazingly complete skeleton.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And so Marvin, I think it is, from Mount Pritchard Primary School, was wondering then, so what did they actually do when they found him, which that picture sort of showed us a little glimpse into. What was the process of recovery?
Yes.
I guess you have to be very, very careful.
Yes, yes, you have to treat these things very carefully when you find them, and they did. And what they did was they took the bones to Canberra, to a university in Canberra, into a laboratory, which is where Mungo Man was studied by scientists. And Jim Bowler, who discovered Mungo Man, he was very excited for this to all happen, but he did also say later on that he didn't really understand why that was a problem for the traditional owners, and why the traditional owners were so upset about that and angry about that. And he, in the years since that happened, he says that, he understands now that, doing that without even asking the Aboriginal people in the area whether that was okay, he regrets not having those conversations earlier. But that's what happened. He just got dug out of the ground, packaged up into a box and taken to the university, which is where he was for years and years and years before he was given back.
And so where was that university? I know someone asked about that. Where were these? Where were the scientists sort of studying Mungo Man?
It was in the ACT, so it was in Canberra at a university. I think it was the Australian National University, but I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, that's all right.
I think so.
Yeah, where he was studied. We're talking to our little birdie at the side. So I was going to ask something. Where is it? How could I don't know if you know, because it's a little bit of a sciencey one, but how could his bones have been preserved for so long? That's from Ella from Evermore Vale Public School again.
Yeah, well, it's really lucky when this happens, because often when people are buried, you know, your bones, they hang around for a while, but eventually nature takes its toll. You get eaten up by bugs in the earth, or you get, you know, over time your bones sort of disintegrate and just
Natural
become
process.
Yeah, just become part of the earth. But sometimes things will be preserved for a really long time in the earth, and it's often to do with where you've been buried and what the ground is made of, and then what happens after that. So what kinds of layers of earth then get built up over the top of you after you've been buried. And if all of the elements come together just right, you can find skeletons that have actually been preserved really well. And there are things, there are actually cases where bodies, really, really old bodies, have been found in bogs, really, you know, old, wet, boggy bogs.
Wow.
And they've been like perfectly preserved, like even with their skin and all. And they've been there for thousands and thousands of years.
That's amazing.
Just because the conditions in that bog were such that, you know, the everything just stayed intact.
Well, I guess it's a little bit, if you like, if you think about Egyptians and mummifying, that's kind of a similar thing. You know, they're using these materials and they found like an embalming process or way to preserve everything so that you do kind of, you know, keep it all there. I don't know if I'd like that.
Gory.
So gory, I love it.
It was the Australian National University. There you go. That's where Mungo Man's remains were taken to be studied.
You go. So, let me see. Did we already answer this, Ruby? Max asked, I'm sorry, I'm so terrible. What do you think will happen to Mungo Man?
Oh, no.
No? Okay, good. Cranbourne Park Primary School. Thank you, Max. What do you think?
So,
because it's a controversial thing, isn't it? And you know, obviously not up to us at all. It's very much
I'm glad it's not up to me.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's very much up to his ancestors or descendants. So to decide that. But yeah, I don't know. What do you reckon? Like, have you got a feeling from doing this story? You know, which way they might be leaning towards? You know, burying him or actually allowing him to be studied further with new technology?
From what I read, so it's really up to not just, it's really up to the Aboriginal people from that specific area, the Willandra Lakes region. And I know that there is, you know, they have different opinions on this. I think that maybe they will, it's impossible to say, I'm not sure.
Yeah,
but I think if
hard.
they buried him, it would be like absolutely fair enough, because he's spent decades now in doing, you know, being a scientific phenomenon for people to pull apart and study and look at. And I think that, you know, if they want to put him back in the ground, then that's where he should go. But if he can hang around for scientists of the future, I know that, you know, science will totally love to have him around, and who knows what we'll be able to find out about him in the future. But, you know, it's a hard call to make, but, and I'm glad that I don't have to make it.
Up to us. Yeah, it's a tough one.
Yeah.
Well, I have a really relevant question, perhaps just to finish us off. It was, when I find it, from Esther at Mark Oliphant College.
Esther.
She said, thanks Esther for your really very on-topic question, which is, Amelia, out of all the food in the world, what would you choose? I don't know what's happened, but you guys have sent me heaps of food questions.
We got
and
like
I feel
20 questions about Amelia and the food.
That's cool. Like, I'm all right with that. I feel like maybe it was Matt's fault / mine, because, yeah, you know, it always ends up happening. So why don't we both answer that? That's a tough question. Out of all the food in the world, so like, is this like a last meal situation, do you think? Or is this just like, if you had to pick one thing that
right
you could,
now?
Yeah, just, or like, what if you, okay, how about what if it's one thing that you have to just eat forever, which is a terrible idea.
Whoa.
Because, like,
you would get
have
so
to
sick of it no matter what it
like
was.
it, right?
Yeah.
I think I know what mine is.
What?
Popcorn.
Pop? Really?
I love popcorn.
I guess if
Don't
you just,
look at me like
if you
that.
pick corn,
Popcorn's the
if you just
best.
pick corn, then you can have popcorn, or you can have corn on the cob, or you can
Oh.
have corn
Are
flakes.
we allowed to do that?
I don't, maybe it's
Probably
cheating.
need something. Excuse me.
Oh,
I just
look,
had
Here we
enough that I'd come
go. Look
over.
who's here. I did say it was probably
Hello.
his fault, didn't I?
Matt, did you tell everyone to send in questions about what Amelia likes to eat?
Like, look, so
Probably
many
almost
questions.
certainly yes.
Look, Amelia, out of all the food in the world, what would you choose?
Oh, it's such a hard question. Can I answer for Amelia
I
here?
think it was Ruby's turn.
I think, oh, so many food. Like donuts,
She is the star of this
pizza,
show. You're not even meant to
pasta.
be here.
I love so
Okay.
many of those foods.
Guess
If
what?
you
We
have
got
any
to, speaking
specific
of
questions
food.
for Matt, just send them to.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's a good thing. I know what you're about to say.
Yeah,
Go
so
on.
tomorrow is actually both of our birthdays.
Yeah.
Mine and Matt.
Ruby and I share a birthday, which is very upsetting if you're me because I feel like I was here first. Ruby's coming along trying to
He
steal
was
my
here
birthday.
first. But that means I get to be
Share it.
younger, so.
You can, I was like physically on the
ooh.
planet first.
Yeah.
But it is related to food because
Yes.
because Matt's birthday is tomorrow.
Yeah.
He brought in cupcakes today, and so we cupcakes.
Cupcakes?
No.
Cakes. Just
No.
cakes.
Donuts.
Donuts.
Wow.
Honestly.
You went through all the birthday things. Donuts, yeah.
Donuts. They were great. That's
yeah,
all.
yeah.
Just wanted
Thank
to
you.
make you all hungry for donuts.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I didn't
and
bake them, I
whose
bought them.
favourite food? That is his favourite
Well,
food,
it's-
Ruby.
I really like donuts, and if you've ever seen BTN, you'll know that there are donuts in some of my stories.
Would you pick that though as your one last food? Like if that was
Is that what
we
we're picking?
changed it. Well, we changed
One
it
last
to.
final food.
Well, no, sorry. That what did we change it to? If you had to
If you
have
had to have one thing and eat it for the rest of your life.
yeah, the rest of your life.
Would it be donuts? Can I change the toppings and the flavourings in and around the
Yes.
donuts?
I think we
so
clarified
I could have
you
peanut
could.
butter.
Yes. Yeah.
Ooh, what's that?
Because I
No.
said, oh, everybody's
Jack's-
joining in.
Jack's eating some of my,
today.
some of my
It's
birthday
a
goodies.
reporter party.
That's-
Well, let me see. I think on that note, maybe we're done. Oh, no, wait.
I need to choose.
Sorry. Okay,
Well,
what
I
was
think everyone's going for very unhealthy food, but I would choose sushi because I love sushi.
sushi.
Yeah.
Oh, I feel like that's cheating a little because it's very broad, but you did allow me to
I would
have-
choose Japanese food.
Yeah,
all
that's it.
Japanese food.
Cheater. But you
don't-
did allow me to have corn when I said
You said
popcorn. So
corn.
no, I said popcorn, but
You
Ruby
need-
was like, pick corn because then you can make it into different
Popcorn,
things.
corn flakes,
So you know.
corn on the cob.
Yeah.
These answers
Innovation.
are very boring, and I hope you guys realise they're
Well,
not very
all right.
good.
Look, get out.
right.
You're not even meant to be here.
I wonder what Mungo
This isn't
Man
your
would have
week.
eaten.
I wonder. He's always doing the camera thing.
Birthdays coming in from the YouTube commenters.
Yes.
Oh, look at that!
Happy
Yay!
birthday
Happy
to
birthdays!
us.
Happy birthday to Ruby, not Matt, because he's not meant to be here. So what's on next week? I don't know. Who's Ask Reporter next week? Does anybody know? Little birdie.
It's a
I can hear a very familiar voice yelling. Recycling. So that'll be Jack sitting right here next week. So oh yeah, there he is. Yeah, he's back there now. He'll be here. Ruby will be there.
I'll be annoying him.
So thank you once again, guys, for tuning in to Ask a Reporter. We had a great
you.
time.
Yeah, we
Thanks
sure
for
did.
answering all the questions, Ruby.
Hope I got most of them right.
That's it.
Don't quote me.
See you guys. Have a good weekend.
Bye.
See you next week.